Hello and welcome back to my project Audi A4 Avant. And if you're watching this episode, you probably know how much I've spent on the vehicle, which was $1,000 buying it, and I definitely put in well more than that to get it where it is today. If you recall, in the last episode, I did a bunch of body work to make this vehicle not look too bad and make it look a little bit newer and nicer than it was before. And in this episode, well, it's going to be a bit interesting because it's back to mechanics on this one, and they're very minor problems, but issues that definitely need to be addressed. And I feel, having owned this vehicle for a while now, it's definitely become more apparent that these issues are becoming worse. Well, the first issue, although kind of minor, it's actually a really annoying one for sure, especially driving it here on the highway where I am now. And there's a bit of a whine coming from the rear diff. Now, you might not be able to hear it, but on deceleration, you can definitely notice it. So I took this vehicle into an Audi specialist, the one I used many years ago when I couldn't turn a wrench on my old B7, and I had them diagnose it. Now, I suspected it had something to do with the bearings in the rear diff, but I wasn't really sure. It could have been a wheel bearing, it could have been something else, and I figured, well, I checked it myself. I don't know what other kind of noise it could possibly be. So they diagnosed that as the rear diff, the whole thing. So I figured rather than ripping the rear diff apart and just, fixing the bearings in there, it's just cheaper to buy a new one. So I did. Now, sort of the other elephant in the room is the suspension. Now, you can hear that. Yeah, it's got some creaking. And when I had my vehicle at the shop, again, with the specialist, I had them check over the suspension, and they had said that yes, the lower control arm on the passenger side is pretty much shot. Well, at least one of them anyways, and they figured it was just best to replace all of the suspension. And I was kind of in agreement with that. I figured it was time because that was very annoying hearing that creaking, and the suspension does kind of feel not as good as it should, so I figured it's just best to replace it. All right, I figured it'd be easy to start with the rear diff and replacing that first. And of course, I have the vehicle jacked up on all fours, so it should be relatively easy to get underneath and replace it. So I'm underneath the car right now, and up above me right here is the rear diff. So that's the front of the car down there. That's the exhaust. This is the rear diff. And this is the troublemaker here that's making all that noise. So this should be relatively easy to take. I looked at the repair manual, and obviously first starting off with these shields on either side for the axles, taking those off, and then bolting the axles, and then the rear drive shaft here, and then obviously just the bolts that are holding this in should be it. Well, it's been quite the work so far, and I actually just took out the exhaust. As you can see there, it's rather large. And then as you see, I still have the rear diff in place. I do have the CVs disconnected on either side, and also the rear drive shaft. So that's all disconnected now. In order to get this rear diff out, I'm going to have to remove these 3 bolts here at the back, and there's also 3 on the left side here as well. On the left is the one I took out of the vehicle, and on the right is the near rear differential. Now, of course, this one is painted orange, which I don't really care for. But fortunately, this is the side that's facing upwards, at least towards the body of the car, so you won't be able to see it as easily. And now it's time to fill the new rear diff with some genuine fluid and then install it. So I just drained the new differential because there was actually still fluid in there. Kind of surprised because usually you have to ship those with no oil whatsoever, and this came from the United States. So anyways, it's now been drained, and here it is. Here's all the fluid that came out of that rear diff, the one I just bought. Okay, time for the new stuff. This is genuine Audi Volkswagen fluid, which was not cheap. I'm gonna use a hand pump to do this rather than just use the bottle. It'll just be easier to pump it into the side here. All right, it's time to get this new used rear differential in the car. And I forgot to mention earlier that this rear differential has 81,000 kilometers, which is not bad considering that the vehicle itself has just over 200,000 kilometers. Well, it's been about 2 weeks since I last worked on the car, and that's because the parts I ordered for the front suspension here, the company I bought them from had sent me duplicates of the same part. That was a bit of a pain, so that was a bit of a waiting game. So now I got the parts, I verified them, I checked them all, they're all good, and now it's time to tackle the front control arms. That's both the upper and lower, and the sway bar end link on either side. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys, I've actually already attempted this on the other side. And a common problem when getting the upper control arms, these here, off, you have to remove what's called a pinch bolt, which slides through this whole section because it keeps these locked in place. Now, if any of you ever worked on a B6 or B7 Audi A4, or maybe even a B8, you'll know that this bolt is often hell trying to get it out. And I very much experienced that because over here, it snapped. So this is what's called the steering knuckle housing, and unfortunately trying to get that bolt out, although using heat and lubricant and being very careful, at one point when I finally got the bolt out, it just gave way right here. So I will have to buy a new, or at least a used one, and then I can replace the whole assembly. So it's just another day in the life of owning a old German luxury car. So hopefully on this side it'll be a little bit smoother. I kind of have a bit of a process which I'm going to try a little bit differently in order to help prevent damage to the steering knuckle. So let's get to it. As you can see, this is the pinch bolt, which I was referring to on the other side. That's often a headache to try and get out. So I'm going to hit it with some penetrant, let it soak for about a half hour, and as well as all these other things I have to disconnect. So down here with the control arms and the sway bar end link. Alright, first I'm going to start off with removing this outer tie rod end here. So there's a 13mm bolt at the top, and I believe this one's a 16. So I'm going to start off with the 13 at the top there first. I was doing the driver's side, I didn't notice at first that this bolt had a little knot, so you can actually use that notch and a chisel and a hammer and then knock out this bolt. Okay, so for this pinch bolt here, it's a 16mm on either side, so there's a 16mm nut on this side, and this is the bolt head. So I'm actually going to loosen up the nut side here with a 16mm box end wrench here. Okay, so the nut is off over here on this side, and now it's just the bolt here, and this is what often snaps. So again, the penetrant's been on there for quite some time. And one thing I do often see people use between these gaps so they don't bind and cause sort of a jam when trying to remove the bolt is something like this, like a file basically, which I'm going to use now, and stuff it in there so that way it won't jam, hopefully. And same on the back side here, there's also an opening right there, which I will use a small little file for that as well. So the penetrant has now been on there for about a half hour or so, so now it's time to hit it with some heat, just using my little torch right here. And for all you health and safety nuts, I do have a fire extinguisher, not that I don't think I'll ever need it. So let's play with fire. Now I'm not going to use the impact gun on this. I'm going to just try it by hand here. Okay, so without even having snapped the bolt head off yet, I already know it's just going to snap eventually. So I don't really have much of a choice here. I have to snap it off and then try and get this bolt out somehow. I don't have an air hammer. I'm not privileged in that sense. I don't have all the tools. So I'm going to have to just break it free, at least the bolt head, and then use the nut on the other side with some washers and get it off. So I finally got it out. That is the pinch bolt. So surprisingly, after a little bit of hard work, meaning that I just used the impact gun and obviously some leverage, just adding in some wrenches essentially on the bolt head side here, and just using that as leverage to pull it out, it worked. I guess you could say this is a small victory getting this out without having to basically chop it up or even risk damaging the knuckle here. So now it'll be a matter of just getting these control arms out, which I think should be pretty easy. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I got these two upper control arms disconnected from this housing right here. And then now it's time to take out the 3 bolts from the strut housing from the engine side. There's one right here, I believe there's one right here, and then one back here. Now those appear to be 16s. You can see here I have the strut assembly. So these are the 2 control arms, which of course are the ones I'm replacing. And this is an original S-line suspension, so you're probably wondering why that's red. That explains it right there. These look like they're 16 mil bolts again, so it should be relatively easy. Crusty. Very crusty. For this control arm, you can see right there some cracking. Yeah, I mean, it's probably original. Yeah, it's original. It's got the original logo right here. So no surprise that it's lasted 200,000 kilometers. Although you joined me about a few days later after the last clip, I unfortunately had to go back to my regular Monday to Friday grind. And now I'm back working on the suspension here. So where I left off basically was I took off the old upper control arms here, both the forward and the rearward for the right side. And these ones are the new ones. So for the new ones here, there are some measurements that you have to basically achieve from the top of the mounting bracket here for the strut. So basically, I think for the front one here, if I recall, it was 81 millimeters from the top. And then the rear one, from basically the midpoint of this little nub right here, it was 70 millimeters. So from the top of the hat here, so this top here. So 70 from this, 81 from this. And they do say plus or minus 2 millimeters, so that was pretty easy to achieve. So once I got the measurements set accordingly, I then torqued them down, and then now it's basically ready to be installed back in the vehicle. Before I installed the new strut, I figured it'd actually be easier to take off this old end link right here, and I'm just going to use a 16 millimeter to do that. Loosen the bolt here on the subframe for the lower control arm, both on either side. So there's this control arm here, and then this control arm over here. Having done the other side here, I know this is the same problem here with this bracket, this right here, which holds in the sway bar, and also the subframe and engine mount will get in the way of taking out this bolt right here for the front control arm. And this is very common actually, so for the 3.2, it does suggest that you do remove this bracket here, which I'm going to do now. Because how painful it was to get these upper control arms out of this housing here, I'm actually going to use some anti-seize and just spread a little bit around it just to help if I ever have to take it out again. Or whoever else has to do this again. Just a little bit. Okay, I've got my new pinch bolt right here, and because these are such a pain in the butt to get out, I'm gonna make sure that I put some anti-seize along this part of the bolt so that way it won't be a problem to get out. So here are both the lower control arms. So this is the forward one, the front one, and this is the rearward one. So I've taken these both out now. So as I was mentioning earlier, this bolt, in order to get that one up fully all the way, you had to actually take off the bracket that holds in the engine and subframe to fully take it out. Now this one on this side here, this one was not as bad. You have to remove a plastic trim piece and in order to get the bolt out all the way. Otherwise it's pretty easy. Okay, so everything is buttoned up here and also down here. So we have the sway bar end link stabilizer right here. That's on. That's the sway bar right there. It's all connected. Same with the rear lower control arm right here. So now I'm actually going to replace this outer tie rod end. So I'm actually going to put this back in order to take it off, if that makes sense. Now I'm just going to put this bolt in through the top here, just a little bit, just to be tight all the way. So I'm going to use this 18 millimeter wrench in the back here to hold the inner tie rod in place. And I'm going to use this crescent wrench here loosen this nut. Now, the one important thing that most of us know, when we take these things off, we have to count how many turns that it takes to take it off. And of course, leaving that nut as close as possible to its original position will help that too. Because last thing you want to do is when you go to put it on, you have it really off in the alignment. So I'm going to count. So that's 1, that's 2. So here's the outer tie rod end. And as you can see, this is the nut here I was having to loosen. Now what I did before I took it off, just as a precautionary thing, is I did kind of just slightly snug it up against the inner tie rod nut there, so that way when I go to take it off and measure it, I know that this nut should be in close approximation to the one I put on the new outer tie rod end. So here on the left is the new outer tie rod end, and on the right is the old one. Now what I'm going to do, obviously just check to compare that they're both very much the same, so I'll move the cap here. And yeah, I just want to make sure that they're both exactly the same before I install it. So they're both approximately the same distance. Obviously I can see a bit of slight differences between the two, which is fine. But now I want to get this nut here as close to matching the other one. Now I do feel like there's more threads on this one, so it may not need to be exact. There we go, I'd say that's good. All right, we'll get this new one installed. So now that I have the wheel set to ride height, meaning that everything is what would be under normal conditions when the vehicle is on the ground, I'm actually ready to torque all the bolts. So up here, I'll be torquing all this, and of course this pinch bolt. Down here, sway bar end links, strut, rear lower control arm, and front lower control arm. And then of course the 3 bolts holding in the strut up here in the engine bay. Everything is torqued down on this side and also the driver's side. So now it's time to put on the wheels. So here are the wheels that are going back on the car. No, I'm just kidding, they're not going back on because of course I hate these wheels, at least from day one since I've had this vehicle. The rims are awful, they look cheap, they look ugly, and I couldn't stand them. And ever since that day I've been looking for a new set of wheels, at least genuine wheels to put on this car, and fortunately I found them. That's right, I'm going to be putting on these S-Line wheels, and believe it or not, these are the same wheels that I had on my 2008 Audi A4 at the time, so I know they'll fit. Now, of course, the tires on these are not perfect. Eventually I will have to get those replaced, but for a pretty good deal on Marketplace, I couldn't pass that up. Now that I'm out here on the road with the new suspension, or at least most new suspension components, and also the new wheels, boy does this car drive like it should. I mean, it's nice and tight. It feels pretty darn good. Of course, it is still going to need an alignment to make it that much better, but I can't really complain. Kind of reminds me how driving my old B7 was, and that kind of confidence when going around a corner. I kind of had that feeling back before. It kind of, you know, felt a bit sloppy sometimes, and you had a little bit more roll. I think because those end links were pretty much toast. But yeah, it feels so much better. With all this work done, I think that pretty much concludes this series. I mean, I really don't know what else you guys would want to see me do on this vehicle. Of course, there are still some things I probably could do, like a detailed video, and I know most of you probably wouldn't want to watch that. I could probably also do a cost breakdown of everything I've spent on this vehicle, and if you want to see something like that, and you know, don't mind sitting through about 10 minutes of that, comment down below, because I could actually make that video. I do have everything in detail. And one thing before I end this video, I know I'm a little late to the party, but I just want to say thank you all so much to each and every one of you that subscribed to this channel. It's crazy. This channel has now surpassed 1,000 subscribers, and I couldn't be more excited about that. It's been a long journey. Well, it seems like a long journey. About 3 years rather of making videos. Yes, I know I don't have hundreds of thousands of videos like a lot of people, but you know, I try and make good quality videos for you guys, and ones that you actually would enjoy. But it's fantastic. You guys have just been such a huge support and make me want to do this more and more. And if you aren't subscribed to the channel, well, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button so that way you don't miss any future videos like this, and also car reviews, which by the way, I will be doing a car review in the upcoming weeks on this vehicle, so stay tuned for that. And until next time, take care. Bye now.